Get this filth out of my sight before it contaminates our donors. Serafina Vanderbilt's voice, sharp as shattered crystal, sliced through the opulent air of the Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom. Her diamond-encrusted bracelet, a blinding constellation of ice, raked across Dr. Heiress Thorne's cheek, leaving a burning triptych of crimson lines. The slap didn't just echo, it detonated, a sonic boom of privilege and contempt. A cascade of vintage Dom Perignon followed, drenching Heiress's chest in a cold, sticky torrent. The flute, a delicate baccarat creation, met the travertine floor and exploded into 1,000 glittering daggers. Heiress crumpled to her knees, the fabric of her custom-made St. John gown tearing against the polished Italian stone. A warm pool of her own blood began to form beneath her trembling palms. Serafina's Christian Louboutin heel, a 5-inch spike of blood-red lacquer, deliberately ground a shard of the broken glass deeper into the back of Heiress's hand. "Stay on the floor where you belong, stray," Serafina hissed, a fine mist of spittle landing on Heiress's forehead. The 400 assembled guests of Los Angeles's high society were frozen in a tableau of shock and morbid curiosity. Champagne flutes hovered mid-air, vapid conversations died on glossed lips, and a sea of iPhones remained, for a moment, eerily still. The annual Starlight Foundation Charity Gala, a night where plates cost more than a teacher's monthly salary, had just devolved into a spectacle of public degradation. Slowly, deliberately, Heiress lifted her head. A single drop of blood fell from her split lip, landing with a soft, almost imperceptible tick on the golden seal of her Stanford Medical School ring. This ring, a simple band of gold, had been a silent witness to miracles, a partner in the delicate dance between life and death that had saved over 2,000 lives. Have you ever seen an act of such pure, unadulterated cruelty that it could bring a billion-dollar empire to its knees in a matter of minutes? Serafina Vanderbilt, heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune, stepped back, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on her lips as she admired her handiwork. Heiress's blood on the pristine floor was like a Rorschach test of her own ugliness, a splash of violent crimson against the pale, indifferent stone. Did everyone see that? Serafina's voice, dripping with theatrical indignation, boomed across the now silent ballroom. "I was just defending this event from a gatecrasher. She was clearly here to steal from our generous donors." The lie was audacious, a masterclass in deflection. "Security should have handled this at the door, but it seems I'm forced to do their job for them." Heiress remained on her knees, her mind a whirlwind of clinical assessment and burning humiliation. She pressed a linen napkin to her cheek, the fabric quickly turning a sickening shade of red. The cuts were deep, she knew. They would require sutures. Her training kicked in, a detached internal monologue cataloging the damage, facial lacerations, a deep puncture wound on her hand, a likely concussion from the impact of the fall. Across the room, near a ridiculously oversized floral arrangement, a young influencer named Chloe Chong had her phone up. She wasn't just recording, she was live streaming to her 1.2 million followers. "Oh my God, you guys," Chloe whispered, her voice a mixture of horror and glee. "I am live at the Starlight Gala, and I think I just witnessed a hate crime. Serafina Vanderbilt just brutally assaulted a black woman." The viewer count on her screen began to climb with dizzying speed. 5,000. 12,000. 25,000. Serafina, oblivious to the digital storm she had just unleashed, addressed the captivated audience. Her diamond tiara, a relic from some forgotten European monarchy, glittered under the chandeliers, a crown of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "This is precisely the issue we face," she declared, her tone that of a martyr. "These people, they think they can just waltz into our world, into our sacred spaces, and take what isn't theirs. She nudged a piece of the broken baccarat flute with the toe of her Louboutin, sending it skittering closer to Heiress's kneeling form. Look at her, dressed in those rags, probably casing the room for unlocked purses or stray diamonds. I saved all of you from being her next victim. Heiress's phone, which had been knocked from her hand, lay on the floor a few feet away. The screen was a spider web of cracks, but it was still alive. It displayed the time, 9:48 p.m. She had 12 minutes until she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address. The irony was a bitter pill, a cruel cosmic joke. The very woman who was currently trying to erase her was supposed to be the one to introduce her as the evening's guest of honor. Marcus Vance, a veteran photographer for Vanity Fair, lowered his camera. His journalistic instincts were screaming at him to keep shooting, to document every second of this horrifying spectacle. But his sense of self-preservation was screaming louder. The Vanderbilt family didn't just have money. They had reach. They could end careers with a single phone call. Yet the images he had already captured, the flash of the diamonds against skin, the sneer on Serafina's face, the quiet dignity in Heiress's eyes, were explosive. They could be the key to exposing the rot that festered beneath the gilded surface of this world. Eleanor Lancaster, the grand dame of Los Angeles society, a woman whose opinion could make or break a debutante, clutched the pearls at her throat. She had known the Vanderbilts for decades. She had watched Serafina grow from a petulant child into this monster. But to speak out now would be to commit social seppuku. Still, she had to try. Serafina, darling, perhaps we should just— Should what, Eleanor? Serafina snapped, her voice turning venomous. Allow criminals to run amok in our midst? This thing is probably riddled with diseases. Look at that dress. It's a cheap knockoff. And the jewelry? Please, she's contaminating the very air we breathe. The cheap knockoff was a vintage piece from a rising black designer, a quiet statement of support that Serafina, with her label-obsessed gaze, could never comprehend. The fake jewelry was a locket containing a picture of her grandmother, a woman who had worked as a nurse for 50 years. It was the locket she touched for luck before every complex surgery, a surgery that had saved the life of a child. Serafina's phone began to buzz incessantly in her clutch, a frantic vibration of notifications she was too engrossed in her performance to notice. "Jonathan," she barked at her father's head of security, a hulking man with a pained expression. "Call the LAPD. I want this woman arrested. Trespassing, attempted theft, and assault." Assault? Marcus Vance couldn't help himself. He had found his voice, and his camera was still recording. "She bumped into me," Serafina spat, her logic a pretzel of lies. "That's assault. And then she reached for my champagne. Attempted robbery. I was simply defending myself. And all of you." Finally, with a grace that seemed impossible given her injuries, Heiress rose to her feet. The bloody napkin was still pressed to her cheek, a stark crimson flower against her dark skin. "Miss Vanderbilt." Heiress's voice was steady, imbued with the calm precision of a surgeon. "I assure you this is all a terrible misunderstanding." "I know." "Don't you dare speak to me!" Serafina shrieked, her carefully constructed composure cracking. "Security! Why is this thing still here? Get it out!" In a fit of rage, she snatched Heiress's purse, a simple leather satchel, and upended it onto the blood-smeared floor. Its contents scattered like the debris of a shipwreck: a stethoscope, a well-worn copy of a medical journal, a hospital ID badge, and a pile of neatly bundled papers. "Fake credentials," Serafina crowed, holding up a laminated card. "Look at this garbage. She's impersonating a doctor." She snatched a document from the floor, waving it like a captured flag. It was Heiress's diploma from Stanford University School of Medicine, where she had graduated summa cum laude. "Probably printed this off the internet this morning." Chloe Chang's live stream went supernova. 50,000, 75,000, 100,000 viewers. The comments were a raging river of outrage. "That's a hate crime. Someone call the real police. Help her, for God's sake." Heiress knelt once more, her movements slow and deliberate, as she began to gather her scattered life. Each document was a testament to a life of relentless dedication. The Stanford diploma, the Johns Hopkins Fellowship Certificate, the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her pioneering work in pediatric neurosurgery. Serafina's Louboutin heel came down with brutal force on Heiress's outstretched hand as she reached for her medical license. The sickening crack of bone was audible in the stunned silence of the ballroom. "Oops," Serafina giggled, a chilling, girlish sound. "So clumsy of me." A wave of nausea washed over Heiress. She bit back a scream, her medical mind instantly identifying the fractures in her 4th and 5th metacarpals. Her right hand, her dominant hand, the hand that had performed over 2,000 life-saving surgeries. "You broke her hand?" Eleanor Lancaster gasped, her voice trembling. "I stepped on a fraudulent document belonging to a fake doctor," Serafina corrected her, her voice dripping with venom. "No harm was done to anyone of consequence." Jonathan Murphy, the head of security, approached, his face a mask of grim resignation. He had been in this business for 20 years, and he had seen the entitled behavior of the rich and powerful up close. But this was different. This was calculated, sadistic cruelty, and it was being broadcast to the world. "Miss Vanderbilt," he began, his voice low and cautious. "Remove this trash from my sight," Serafina interrupted, her voice a low growl. "Take her out through the service entrance. I don't want her filth contaminating the main lobby where our real guests might see her." Heiress's shattered phone buzzed again. It was a detail that Serafina, in her blind rage, had overlooked. The screen displayed an incoming call. "Charles Vanderbilt. Private." Her father. He had been trying to reach her for the last 10 minutes. The same Charles Vanderbilt who was at that very moment being rushed from his downtown office, desperate to get to the gala to introduce the woman his daughter was currently torturing as the evening's keynote speaker and the donor of a staggering $75 million gift. On Chloe Chang's phone, the digital world was on fire. The hashtag Your Vanderbilt Assault was trending not just in Los Angeles, but nationwide. The video had been shared over 50,000 times in the last 8 minutes. But Serafina Vanderbilt, the heiress to a $3 billion pharmaceutical empire built on the promise of healing and compassion, remained blissfully unaware. She stood, triumphant, over Heiress's broken and bleeding form, her diamond tiara glittering, her couture gown immaculate save for a few tiny, almost decorative, specks of blood. "Clean this up," Serafina commanded the hotel staff, gesturing dismissively at Heiress as if she were a piece of garbage, "and have this entire area sanitized. God only knows what kind of diseases she's carrying." Heiress clutched her broken hand to her chest, the cool metal of her Stanford ring a familiar comfort. It was the same ring that had guided her hand through countless delicate procedures, including one terrifying stormy night 17 years ago, when she had spent 9 hours in an operating room, refusing to give up on a scared, critically ill 8-year-old girl named Serafina Vanderbilt. The same little girl who had whispered "thank you" through a haze of anesthesia had grown into the woman who now called her filth as her blood stained the Italian travertine. But Heiress Thorne had learned many things in her life. She had learned patience from long hours in the lab. She had learned precision in the operating theater. And she had learned about the quiet, unyielding power that comes from saving lives that others have deemed worthless. Her moment was coming. The clock on her shattered phone read 9:55 p.m. Showtime was in 5 minutes. Serafina Vanderbilt savored the horrified silence, basking in it as if it were a standing ovation. Heiress's blood was already beginning to dry on the floor, a dark, ugly stain on the polished perfection of the Gala, a crime scene masquerading as a charity event. "Someone get me some more champagne," Serafina announced, stepping disdainfully over Heiress's scattered medical credentials. "All of this drama has made me terribly thirsty." Chloe Chang's live stream had transcended the bubble of Los Angeles society and was now a national spectacle. The viewer count ticked relentlessly upward: 150,000, 175,000, 200,000. The comment section was a torrent of fury. "This is Sarah Carter reporting live from what can only be described as a public lynching at the Starlight Foundation Gala," she whispered into her phone. "The heiress, Serafina Vanderbilt, just broke this woman's fingers with her heel after calling her filth and an animal." The hashtag #Serafina. The monster was now trending worldwide. But Serafina, drunk on her own power and the sycophantic praise of her inner circle, remained in her gilded bubble. A trio of socialites had flocked to her side, their couture gowns forming a protective barrier between Heiress and any potential aid. "Serafina, you were magnificent," gushed one, a woman whose face was a testament to the art of plastic surgery. Someone needed to put that creature in her place. "So brave," cooed another. "Daddy always says these people are getting far too bold, trying to invade our spaces." Heiress struggled to her feet, the simple act of standing an agony. Her broken fingers sent waves of fire up her arm. She had performed surgery with a sprained wrist, delivered a baby during a power outage, but the calculated cruelty of Serafina's attack had broken more than just her bones. It had chipped away at her faith in humanity. Hotel staff were now approaching with mops and buckets, their movements brisk and efficient, treating her blood like a spilled drink that needed to be cleaned up before it stained the floor. They avoided her gaze, their eyes downcast, their loyalty bought and paid for by the Vanderbilt fortune. Security Chief Jonathan Murphy's earpiece crackled to life. "Code black in the ballroom. Initiate media containment protocol. No one leaves without hotel authorization." It was too late. The story was already a raging wildfire, and it was far beyond their control. David Chen, a prominent financial analyst and blogger, had just arrived. He was here for the end-of-evening auction, but he had walked into a war zone. His connections to Wall Street and the international investment community made him a sought-after guest at these events. But tonight, as he watched Serafina's performance, he saw a different kind of opportunity. "Ladies and gentlemen," David announced, his voice cutting through the tense silence, "you are all witnesses to a federal hate crime, which is currently being broadcast live to over 250,000 people." He held up his phone, displaying the exploding viewer numbers. "I sincerely hope your attorneys are as expensive as your gowns, because this footage is already in the hands of the ACLU and every major news network." Serafina's champagne flute paused halfway to her lips. "A federal hate crime? Don't be absurd. I was protecting our guests from a dangerous trespasser." "You called her filth and an animal. You claimed she was carrying diseases, and you spat on her, all before breaking her hand with your shoe," David replied, his voice cold and precise. "That is the textbook definition of assault with racial motivation. Those are federal charges, Ms. Vanderbilt." The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with the palpable sense of impending doom. Guests began surreptitiously checking their phones, their faces paling as they saw their own names being tagged in the viral posts. Several couples began to drift towards the exits, only to be politely but firmly stopped by hotel security. But Serafina Vanderbilt had spent her entire life insulated from consequences. Her wealth was a fortress, her privilege an impenetrable shield. She doubled down. "Look at her," she shrieked, pointing a trembling, diamond-clad finger at Heiress. "She's probably infected with something. Hepatitis, AIDS, God knows what other filth she's carrying. I was protecting all of you." The accusation of being diseased, of being a carrier of filth, was a blow more painful than the slap or the broken bones. Heiress had dedicated her entire life to healing, to fighting disease, only to be branded as a plague by the very woman whose life she had saved. Chloe Chang's live stream captured every vicious word. The comments section erupted with a new level of fury. Doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals who were watching the stream began to comment, their words a mixture of outrage and solidarity. "This is why we face violence in the workplace. Sue her for everything she's worth." "Where are the damn police?" Marcus Vance, the Vanity Fair photographer, made a decision that would change the course of his career. He had spent years playing the game, protecting the wealthy and powerful with his camera, his silence bought with access and invitations. But this was a bridge too far. He uploaded his high-resolution photos to his Instagram account, his captions simple and factual. "Serafina Vanderbilt assaulting Dr. Heiress Thorne at the Starlight Gala." The images were devastating. The diamonds tearing at Heiress's skin, the heel grinding into her hand, the spittle on her forehead as 400 of the city's elite stood by and did nothing. The post went viral in seconds. Serafina's phone was now buzzing so violently it was almost vibrating off the table. She finally looked at it, her eyes widening in disbelief as she scrolled through a sea of messages calling her a racist, a monster, a criminal. "What is happening?" she demanded, her voice a mixture of confusion and fury. "You're trending, darling," David Chen said with a grim smile. "For all the wrong reasons." Heiress's medical training had conditioned her to compartmentalize, to focus in the midst of chaos, to maintain her composure under unimaginable pressure. With her unbroken left hand, she methodically gathered her credentials from the floor, ignoring the searing pain in her right. Each document was a milestone in a life dedicated to excellence. Stanford valedictorian. Johns Hopkins Fellowship. 2,147 successful pediatric surgeries. The Presidential Medal of Freedom for her groundbreaking work in neuroregenerative medicine. The same medicine that had saved Serafina Vanderbilt's life after a catastrophic equestrian accident on September 12, 2008. But Serafina, high on a cocktail of champagne and cruelty, remained blissfully unaware of the identity of the woman she was trying to destroy. "Security!" she shrieked, her voice now shrill with panic. "Why is this creature still in my sight? I want her arrested, now!" Jonathan Murphy approached, his radio crackling with frantic updates from hotel management. The Vanderbilt family was the hotel's biggest client, but a federal hate crime investigation could ruin their reputation. A reputation that was currently being torched online. "Ms. Vanderbilt," he said, his voice firm but respectful. "Perhaps we should wait for—" "Wait for what?" Serafina shrieked. "For her to infect more of our guests? For her to steal the silverware?" Her voice was reaching a hysterical pitch. "I'm calling my father. He'll handle this." She speed-dialed her father's number, oblivious to the fact that Charles Vanderbilt was stuck in the snarled traffic of the 405 freeway, racing to the hotel to introduce Dr. Heiress Thorne as the evening's guest of honor and the donor of a $75 million gift. The call went to voicemail. "Daddy, there's been a security breach at the gala. Some woman, some piece of trash, tried to rob our guests. I took care of it, but she's still here, bleeding all over the floor. Call me back." The time on Heiress's phone read 9:57 p.m., 3 minutes until her keynote address. The same speech in which she had planned to announce her $75 million donation to fund a new pediatric neurosurgery wing at a hospital in an underserved community. A program that would save children who looked like her, children whose parents were dismissed as trash and filth by people like Serafina Vanderbilt. The crystal chandeliers of the ballroom seemed to catch the light from 100 camera phones, creating a constellation of evidence. Every angle of Serafina's brutal assault had been captured, uploaded, and shared, reaching an audience of millions. But the cruelest, most damning irony was still a secret. Dr. Heiress Thorne had spent her entire career saving lives that society had written off as worthless, while Serafina Vanderbilt, the woman who had just branded her as diseased filth, owed her own life to Heiress's brilliant, life-saving hands. Serafina glanced at her diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch, a bauble that cost more than the average American's annual salary. "It's almost 10 o'clock, she announced to the room. "Time for my father's speech and the introduction of our real keynote speaker." She offered the crowd a triumphant, psychopathic smile, the blood still visible under her perfectly manicured nails. "I certainly hope whoever they found to replace this fraud is more appropriate for an audience of this caliber." Slowly, painfully, Heiress stood. She cradled her broken hand, her blood-stained gown a silent testament to Serafina's brutality. Inside her satchel lay the notes for her speech, data on pediatric mortality rates, and photographs of the 2,147 children whose lives she had saved. Children who would have never grown up if Serafina Vanderbilt had died on that operating table 17 years ago. 9:59 p.m. 1 minute until the most important speech of Heiress's life. The speech that would reveal to Serafina Vanderbilt and to the world exactly whose life she had just tried to destroy. The ballroom doors burst open with the force of a man trying to outrun a hurricane. Charles Vanderbilt, his silver hair in disarray, his face ashen, stumbled into the room, his tuxedo wrinkled, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool evening air. "Heiress, my dear girl, I am so terribly sorry I'm late. The traffic on the 405 was—" His voice trailed off, dying in his throat as he took in the scene before him. It was not a gala, it was a crime scene, and his daughter was the perpetrator. Dr. Heiress Thorne, the woman he considered a living saint, was standing amidst the wreckage of her own public humiliation, her face bruised and bleeding, her hand bent at an unnatural angle, her blood staining the floor of the ballroom like some macabre piece of modern art. The silence in the room was absolute, a fragile stretched wire on the verge of snapping. The 400 members of Los Angeles' elite held their breath, their champagne flutes frozen, the dawning realization that they were witnessing the immolation of a dynasty in real time. "What in the name of God happened here?" Charles Vanderbilt's voice, a voice that commanded boardrooms and swayed politicians, was now a trembling whisper of disbelief and horror. Serafina spun around, her face lighting up with a deranged, manic joy. "Daddy, perfect timing. I've just saved your gala from a dangerous intruder." She gestured towards Heiress's bleeding form, with the pride of a hunter displaying her kill. This woman crashed our party. She was probably planning on stealing from the auction, or infecting our guests with God knows what. I handled the situation before she could cause any real harm." Her diamond tiara glittered, the light catching the facets and creating a shower of rainbows that seemed obscene against the backdrop of Heiress's suffering. Charles's eyes darted from his daughter's blood-spattered gown to Heiress's shattered phone, from the shards of crystal embedded in her skin to the Stanford diploma lying in a puddle of spilled champagne. His face cycled through a series of emotions, confusion, then horror, then a deep, soul-crushing despair. His breathing grew ragged, and he clutched at his chest, as if the sheer magnitude of his daughter's actions was enough to stop his heart. Serafina. His voice was barely audible, each word laden with the weight of a lifetime of disappointment. "Do you have any idea who this woman is?" "Some piece of trash trying to social climb," Serafina replied, with a casual, dismissive cruelty, inspecting her nails for any trace of Heiress's blood. "Probably works in the kitchen. Look at her cheap dress, her fake ID. I've already called the police. She's going to be arrested for trespassing and assault." She kicked at Heiress's medical bag. "And fraud, too. Impersonating a doctor with those ridiculous fake papers." Charles Vanderbilt felt the foundations of his world crumble. Each word his daughter spoke was a wrecking ball, demolishing the empire he had spent his life building. "This," he said, his words falling like stones into the silent pool of the ballroom, "is Dr. Heiress Thorne." The name hung in the air, an indictment and a death sentence. She is the chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Cedars-Sinai. She is the woman who is donating $75 million to our foundation tonight. She is the keynote speaker you were supposed to be introducing with honor and with gratitude. The crystal chandeliers seemed to dim as the catastrophic reality of Serafina's mistake began to sink in. On Chloe Chang's live stream, the commentary was a breathless, staccato burst of disbelief. "Oh my God, you guys, you are not going to believe this. The woman Serafina Vanderbilt just assaulted is the keynote speaker. She's the big donor." The viewer count exploded past 500,000. Serafina's champagne flute slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the travertine floor in a perfect, chilling echo of her assault on Heiress. The sound was a death knell for the Vanderbilt name. That's impossible," she stammered, her voice cracking, her carefully constructed world fracturing like the glass at her feet. "Look at her. She's nothing." "She is the most celebrated pediatric surgeon in the world," Charles interrupted, his voice breaking with a shame so profound it was almost a physical force. "She has saved over 2,000 children's lives. She has been awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Twice. She has pioneered surgical techniques that are now taught in every major medical school on the planet. She is the guest of honor at this gala." He rushed to Heiress's side, kneeling in his Tom Ford tuxedo, oblivious to the blood and champagne staining the knees of his $1,000 trousers. The broken glass dug into his knees, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony of watching his legacy being incinerated by his own daughter. "Heiress, my dear God, what has she done to you?" His voice was a raw cry of anguish, the sound of a father witnessing his child become a monster. Heiress looked up at him, her eyes swollen, her split lip making it difficult to speak, but her dignity, her grace, remained unbroken. "Hello, Charles," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I'm afraid your daughter and I had a misunderstanding." Serafina stumbled backwards, her Louboutin heels slipping on the treacherous mix of blood and champagne. Her world was tilting, reality reconfiguring itself into a nightmare. "No," she whispered, her voice a ghost of its former arrogance. "No, that's impossible. She's black. She doesn't look like... She can't be." The racist assumption, the ugly, unspoken truth behind her actions, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Serafina Vanderbilt, for all her education and worldly travel, could not conceive of a world where a black woman could be her superior, where brilliance and excellence could exist in a form she had been taught to despise. Charles helped Heiress to her feet, his touch gentle, his movements careful around her broken hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice ringing with a funereal solemnity, "you are in the presence of greatness. Dr. Heiress Thorne has not only revolutionized her field, she has saved thousands of lives. She developed techniques that were once thought impossible. And tonight, she came here prepared to make one of the largest private donations in the history of our foundation." He turned to face his daughter, his expression that of a man watching his life's work go up in flames. and my daughter just assaulted her on a live stream that has now been viewed by over 500,000 people. Marcus Vance's photographs were now everywhere, a viral firestorm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. The hashtag #JobTuFarschacher Vanderbilt assault was trending in over a dozen countries. News networks were breaking into their regular programming. The stock price of Vanderbilt Pharmaceuticals was plummeting in after-hours trading, but Charles Vanderbilt was not finished. He was going to burn his daughter's world to the ground, just as she had burned his. "Serafina," he said, his voice laced with 30 years of accumulated shame. "Dr. Thorne didn't just save 2,000 children's lives. She saved one life that should matter to you more than any other." The color drained from Serafina's face. Her expensive makeup was a grotesque mask, unable to hide the dawning horror in her eyes. Even her lipstick seemed to have lost its color. "September 12, 2008, Charles continued, his words a relentless drumbeat of condemnation. "St. John's Hospital, 3:22 a.m. You were 8 years old. You had been thrown from a horse. Your spleen was ruptured. You had massive internal bleeding and a traumatic brain injury. 2 different surgeons, the best in the city, had given you up for dead. They said you were too far gone." Heiress watched as the memory, buried for so long under layers of privilege and entitlement, began to surface in Serafina's eyes, a horrific sunrise illuminating the full, monstrous scope of her betrayal. "But one surgeon," Charles's voice cracked with an emotion he had suppressed for 17 years. "One brilliant, tireless woman refused to give up. She operated for 9 straight hours. She held your life in her hands, Serafina. She breathed you back into existence. Dr. Heiress Thorne is the reason you are alive today. And you just called her diseased filth while she bled on the floor of my gala." Serafina's legs gave out. She collapsed into a nearby chair, her couture gown pooling around her like a shroud, her diamond tiara slipping from her hair, a fallen crown. "No," she whimpered, her voice the broken cry of a child. "No, that's not. That can't be." With her unbroken hand, Heiress reached into her satchel. She pulled out a faded, dog-eared photograph, a picture she had kept in her wallet for 17 years, a talisman of hope, a reminder of why she did what she did. It was a picture of a scared 8-year-old girl with blonde pigtails and tear-streaked cheeks, holding a hand-drawn thank you card. "You drew me a picture of a unicorn," Heiress said softly, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom like a prayer. "And you wrote, 'Thank you for fixing me.' You said you wanted to be a doctor, just like me, so you could help people." The photograph was passed from hand to hand through the stunned crowd, a piece of evidence in the trial of Serafina Vanderbilt. The image was undeniable. A smiling 8-year-old Serafina hugging the very woman she had just tried to destroy. Charles Vanderbilt's empire was in freefall. His phone was a relentless torrent of calls from board members, from investors, from federal regulators who had seen the viral footage. "Heiress," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of his own creation. "Please, tell me what we can do to fix this, to make this right." But Dr. Heiress Thorne had learned the art of strategic patience in the high-stakes world of life-and-death surgery. She stood tall, cradling her broken hand, her blood-stained gown a testament to her ordeal. "Mr. Vanderbilt," she said, her voice now firm and clear, "I believe we need to have a very serious discussion about the terms of my donation." The ballroom held its collective breath. $75 million, and the future of the Starlight Foundation hung in the balance. On Chloe Chang's live stream, the viewer count had surpassed 800,000. They were all witnesses to the negotiation that would decide the fate of one of America's largest charitable foundations. Serafina looked up, a glimmer of desperate hope in her eyes. "Daddy can fix this, can't he? Just write her a check. Make her sign an NDA." "Serafina, be quiet!" Charles commanded, his voice a roar of paternal fury. "You have done more than enough damage for one lifetime." Heiress pulled out a tablet, its screen cracked but still functional. "Let me show you the precise financial and legal ramifications of your daughter's actions." The numbers and legal statutes appeared on the screen with the cold, hard precision of a medical diagnosis. Starlight Foundation current assets, $3.2 billion. Your daughter's assault has been viewed by nearly 1 million people in the last hour. The hashtag Honor of Vanderbilt Assault is trending in 42 countries. The footage shows clear, irrefutable evidence of a racially motivated hate crime, assault with a deadly weapon, your daughter's diamond bracelet and her shoe, and witness intimidation. She scrolled to another page, a list of federal statutes that made Charles's face turn white. Under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, your daughter is facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal prison. The racial motivation triggers enhanced sentencing guidelines. The legal exposure was catastrophic, but Heiress wasn't finished. The institutional damage is even worse. Major donors are already pulling their funding. The Gates Foundation just withdrew a $50 million pledge. Warren Buffett has canceled his $30 million annual contribution. The Ford Foundation is demanding an emergency board meeting. Charles watched as 40 years of his life's work dissolved in a matter of minutes. His phone showed missed calls from the Attorney General's office and the White House. "Heiress, please," he begged. "What do you want? What will it take to save the foundation, to save my daughter?" Heiress had made life-or-death decisions every day of her professional life. Tonight, she held the life of an institution and the future of a family in her wounded hands. "I have 3 options for you, Charles. Your choice will determine whether the Starlight Foundation and your daughter have a future." She opened a document that made Serafina let out a choked sob. "Option 1. Full criminal prosecution. I press federal hate crime charges. Your daughter faces a minimum of 10 years in prison. Your foundation will be subject to a federal investigation that will likely lead to its dissolution." Charles's breathing grew shallow. This was not just the end of his empire. It was the end of his daughter's life. Option 2. Institutional reform under federal oversight. Your daughter pleads guilty, accepts her sentence, and your foundation undergoes a complete and total restructuring, supervised by the Department of Justice. She scrolled to a list of requirements that made Charles grab the back of a chair for support. A newly created Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer position with a salary of $500,000 and direct reporting to the DOJ. Mandatory, federally supervised anti-bias training for all board members and employees. A $25 million victim compensation fund. Option 3, Heiress said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, is complete and total transformation. Your daughter is permanently removed from any and all foundation activities. The board is dissolved and reconstituted with a 60% minority representation. An independent, federally appointed firm will oversee all operations for the next decade. And you will personally fund a new $50 million foundation, administered by me, dedicated to promoting minority women in the fields of science and medicine. "And my $75 million donation?" Charles asked, his voice hoarse. "That," Heiress said, her eyes boring into his, "depends entirely on which option you choose. I came here tonight to fund a new hospital wing for children in underserved communities. Children who look like me, from families your daughter would dismiss as filth. I will not, under any circumstances, allow my money to support an institution that breeds the kind of hatred your daughter has displayed." Charles's phone rang. It was the Attorney General of the United States. He was no longer just dealing with a PR nightmare. This was a federal crisis. "Heiress," Charles pleaded. "Thousands of children, of families, depend on the work our foundation does. Surely there is a way forward that doesn't involve destroying everything we've built. Why, your daughter called me diseased filth while she broke my hand with her heel, Heiress replied, her voice as sharp and precise as a scalpel. She spat on the woman who saved her life. She committed a federal hate crime on live television while 1 million people watched. Serafina finally found her voice, a broken, desperate whimper. I didn't know it was you. I didn't recognize you. If I had known you were the doctor, Who what, Serafina? Heiress's voice cut through the ballroom like a surgeon's blade. Who saved your life? Who spent 9 hours fighting to keep you alive when everyone else had given up on you? Who held your heart in her hands? The image of young Serafina hugging Heiress had now gone viral, displayed side by side with the images of the assault. The contrast was a devastating indictment of a life of unearned privilege and learned hatred. You didn't recognize me, Heiress continued, her voice relentless, because you never saw me as a person. I was just another black woman to you, invisible until I became an inconvenience, and then I became filth, an animal that needed to be removed. Charles understood. His daughter's racism, a poison that had been allowed to fester in the rarefied air of their privileged world, had created a federal case that was going to destroy everything he held dear. Dr. Heiress Thorne held all the cards. She could choose justice, or she could choose mercy. What do you recommend, Heiress? You've seen the good we do. You know our work. I know the good you claim to do, Heiress corrected him. But your daughter's behavior is not an anomaly. It is a symptom of a deep, systemic rot within your organization. She pulled up a series of internal documents on her tablet, documents that made Charles's blood run cold. Hiring records that showed a clear pattern of racial bias, grant applications that overwhelmingly favored wealthy white communities, board meeting minutes from exclusive all-white country clubs. The evidence was irrefutable. Serafina's assault was not the act of a single, rogue individual. It was the inevitable product of an institutionally racist culture. Your daughter did not learn this hatred in a vacuum, Charles. She learned it by observing the true values of your foundation, the values that lie beneath the glossy veneer of your public relations. Serafina's sobs echoed through the ballroom as she realized the true extent of the damage she had caused. Her cruelty had not only destroyed her own life, it had exposed her father's empire as a corrupt, hypocritical sham. So, here is my final offer, Heiress announced, her voice ringing with the authority of a woman who had saved thousands of lives and was now in the position to save or destroy an institution. You have 10 minutes to decide. Option 3, complete and total transformation with my $75 million donation and a new federally mandated path forward. Or Option 1, criminal prosecution and the complete and total destruction of everything you have ever built. Charles Vanderbilt looked at his daughter, the child whose life Heiress had saved, the monster she had become, and he understood. Justice, in its own time and in its own way, had finally come for the Vanderbilt family. The woman they had tried to erase now held their entire future in her wounded hands. Hands that had once, so long ago, held his daughter's fragile, beating heart. Dr. Heiress Thorne had learned patience in medical school, precision in surgery, and power through years of saving lives that others had written off as worthless. Now, she would decide if the Starlight Foundation and the soul of Serafina Vanderbilt were worth saving. The clock was ticking. Charles Vanderbilt's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. It was the same Mont Blanc he had used to sign billion-dollar deals and seven-figure donations. Tonight, he would use it to sign the unconditional surrender of his empire. I accept your terms, Heiress. Option 3, complete and total transformation. His signature was not just a legal act. It was an act of contrition, binding the Starlight Foundation to the most sweeping, comprehensive anti-discrimination settlement in the history of American philanthropy. Serafina watched as her father signed away the world she had so casually destroyed. "Serafina Vanderbilt," Heiress announced, her voice resonating with a surgical precision, "you are hereby removed from all foundation positions, effective immediately. Your trust fund will be frozen, pending the completion of your court-ordered community service and federally mandated anti-bias training." Serafina's sobs were the funeral dirge for her former life. The heiress who had once dripped in diamonds and casually dismissed a human being as filth was now facing complete social and financial obliteration. But Heiress's next move sent a new shockwave through the stunned ballroom. She withdrew a set of official documents from her satchel, documents that would not just reform the Starlight Foundation, but reshape the entire landscape of American charity. "The Department of Justice will announce the Starlight Foundation federal partnership tomorrow morning," she stated, her voice carrying to Chloe Chang's now 1.2 million live viewers. "This case will become the new model for institutional racism reform for all major charitable foundations in the United States." Charles understood the magnitude of what was happening. His daughter's monstrous act had inadvertently become the catalyst for a revolution. Heiress hadn't just saved his foundation, she was using it to change the world. "Your new Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer will be Dr. Imani Davis," Heiress continued, "former lead counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and a federal prosecutor." She displayed Dr. Davis's formidable credentials on her tablet. "Her salary will be $500,000, and she will have direct reporting authority to the Attorney General's office." The woman now tasked with overseeing the Vanderbilt legacy had built her career dismantling the very systems of privilege that had created it. "And Serafina's community service," Heiress announced, the irony a palpable force in the room, "will be served in the pediatric ward of the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Hospital in Watts. 500 hours, working directly with the children whose lives I have saved, learning the value of the human beings she once dismissed as worthless." The ballroom watched as Serafina Vanderbilt, the monster of Beverly Hills, psychologically collapsed. She would spend the next year of her life not in ball gowns, but in hospital scrubs, cleaning up after sick children, witnessing firsthand the life-saving work of the woman she had tried to destroy. Heiress's phone displayed the real-time results of her victory. The Vanderbilt Pharmaceuticals stock had stabilized following the announcement of the reforms, but the power structure had been permanently altered. The old guard was out, and a new era of federal oversight and accountability was in. "The Victim Compensation Fund will go live on Monday," Heiress continued. $25 million, administered by a panel of federal judges, available to any individual who has experienced discrimination at the hands of the Starlight Foundation. She scrolled through a series of damning internal emails exposing a long and sordid history of racist hiring practices and biased grant allocations. Those patterns of discrimination end tonight. Chloe Chang's live stream had become the most watched event in the history of social media, a real-time documentary of the dismantling of an empire and the birth of a movement. "Your board of directors will be dissolved and reconstituted within 90 days, Heiress announced. 60% minority representation will be mandatory. Charles Vanderbilt nodded, his face a mask of grim acceptance. Heiress was not just reforming his foundation, she was rebuilding it from the ground up, replacing the rotten, racist infrastructure with a framework of federal accountability. And most importantly, Heiress said, her voice softening for the first time, my $75 million donation will proceed as planned, but the funds will be used to establish the Serafina Vanderbilt Center for Redemption and Pediatric Care. Serafina looked up, her tear-streaked face a mixture of confusion and shock. Every child who is treated at this center, Heiress explained, will know that their care was funded by a woman who learned, the hard way, that hatred can be transformed into healing. Your act of violence, Serafina, will become the foundation for saving the very lives you once deemed worthless. The irony was perfect, it was brutal, and it was redemptive. Serafina's racist assault would now fund the health care for the communities she had so viciously denigrated, a living, breathing monument to the consequences of her actions. Heiress walked over to Serafina's chair. She knelt, meeting her gaze, ignoring the pain in her broken hand. 17 years ago, you drew me a picture of a unicorn, and you told me you wanted to be a doctor. That little girl is still in you, Serafina. Your work at the hospital will help you find her again. Serafina's response was a choked, almost inaudible whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You saved my life. And I don't know who I became. For the first time, her words held the ring of genuine remorse, not the desperate, self-serving panic of a cornered animal. Heiress stood, her dignity a shining, unbreakable shield. An apology is a starting point, not a destination. Your actions in the coming months will determine if your remorse is real. Charles Vanderbilt looked at the woman his daughter had assaulted, and he understood that Dr. Heiress Thorne had just performed another miracle. This time, the surgery had been on the soul of his family. The Starlight Foundation Federal Partnership will be announced at a press conference tomorrow morning, Heiress said, checking her watch. Every major media outlet will be there. This will be the lead story on every news channel in the country. She gathered her scattered credentials, each one a testament to a lifetime of excellence that Serafina had tried to negate with a single racist slur. Your foundation will now operate under federal oversight for a minimum of 10 years. Every hire, every grant, every board decision will require the approval of the Department of Justice. The transformation was complete. Charles Vanderbilt's empire had been reborn, not as a monument to his own ego, but as a testament to the transformative power of justice. One final thing, Heiress announced, her voice resonating with the quiet authority of a woman who had just reshaped the world of American philanthropy. Serafina's first day of community service is tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp. She will spend the next 12 months learning the value of the lives she once dismissed as filth. Serafina nodded through her tears, understanding that her own monstrous act had created the very system that would now either redeem her or destroy her. The livestream had documented it all. The assault, the confrontation, the negotiation, the transformation. The Starlight Foundation case would be taught in law schools and business schools for generations to come, a case study in the catastrophic consequences of unchecked privilege and institutional racism. Dr. Heiress Thorne had walked into the Beverly Hills Hotel as a guest of honor. She was leaving as the architect of a revolution. Her hand was broken, her face was bruised, but she had transformed a brutal personal assault into a systemic, institutional victory. The woman Serafina Vanderbilt had called diseased filth had not only saved the Starlight Foundation, but had created a blueprint for dismantling the racist power structures that had plagued American philanthropy for centuries. Justice, as it turned out, was a surgery best performed with a steady hand, strategic patience, and the unwavering power of a woman who had spent a lifetime saving lives that others had deemed worthless. Serafina's assault had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable, creating the very system that would prevent future Serafina Vanderbilts from ever wielding their power in such a cruel and destructive way again. The transformation was complete, and Dr. Heiress Thorne had just performed her most miraculous surgery yet. 3 years later, Dr. Heiress Thorne stood on the stage of that same Beverly Hills hotel ballroom, but the world had changed. The Starlight Foundation Federal Partnership had become the gold standard, implemented in over 500 major charitable organizations, creating the most sweeping anti-discrimination framework in the history of American philanthropy. In the front row, a young woman in a crisp white lab coat watched her with tears in her eyes. Serafina Vanderbilt, now in her third year at Johns Hopkins Medical School, had just been awarded a prestigious fellowship in pediatric neurosurgery. She would be training under Dr. Thorne. Her community service had not just redeemed her. It had ignited a passion, a purpose, a desire to heal the world she had once tried to harm. Dr. Thorne didn't just save my life once, Serafina would later tell a reporter. She saved it twice. The Serafina Vanderbilt Center for Redemption and Pediatric Care had become a beacon of hope, providing world-class medical care to thousands of children from underserved communities. The Starlight Foundation, under its new, diverse leadership, had become a model of inclusive, equitable philanthropy. Discrimination complaints across the nonprofit sector had plummeted by 70%. Hiring of minority executives had increased by 400%. Heiress's personal journey had been equally transformative. She had been appointed as the Surgeon General of the United States, the youngest in the nation's history. Her memoir, Scalpel and Soul, had become a #1 bestseller, its message of resilience, forgiveness, and the transformative power of justice inspiring millions. Now it's your turn. Have you ever witnessed an act of injustice that was transformed into a force for positive change? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience could be the spark that ignites the next revolution. Tag a healthcare professional in your life who deserves to be celebrated for their compassion and their dedication. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, resilience, and the quiet power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of hatreds. Your voice matters. Your story has power. Together, let's build a world where our shared humanity is the only label that matters.